Hello and welcome to Wild Woman. My name is Mary and I'm on a journey of spiritual and creative recovery. And I started making these YouTube videos for my channel, Wild Woman, in 2019. And 2019 was a year for me of a lot of spiritual growth, a lot of recovering that inner spiritual life and recovering my creativity. And in that process, I made a lot of great work internally and just thinking through a lot of these things that have to do with the spiritual life. And I've been wanting to make a video now for a couple of weeks. But like most people, 2020, the first half of 2020 has been kind of a dumpster fire. We had just health issues throughout the family, health issues with myself, with my parents, with my husband. And so it's been kind of crazy. And the last couple of weeks especially have been kind of difficult with a lot going on. So I'm finally getting around to making some videos for my YouTube channel. And I think I'm going to make a couple of more videos and then I'll post those throughout the week. So stay tuned for additional videos. But this week I wanted to talk about a lot of what's been going on in our country. Particularly, I think it's been like a month ago now since the George Floyd murder. And since then, there's been this surge in the Black Lives Matter movement and protests and riots going on. And there's been a lot of discussion going on around racism in America and what that means and how do we move forward. There's been a lot of discussions about defunding and disbanding police departments. There's been a lot of conversation about white privilege and what does that mean. And there's been a lot of talking going on. And so I wanted to make this response. And I made a video a couple of weeks ago and I just posted it on my personal Facebook page, just kind of for my friends and family, because I sort of was thinking at the time that this doesn't really fit the theme of my Wild Woman YouTube channel, which is mostly about creative and spiritual growth. And then it occurred to me that if spiritual growth is only an internal thing, that it only affects me only, it's really kind of invalid. That if my spiritual growth doesn't lead me to social justice issues and it doesn't lead me to speaking out against these issues, then growing spiritually really has no purpose and meaning. That if it's not leading me to outward motion or outward activity, then it's really kind of pointless. So I decided that speaking out on social justice issues and racial justice is part of that spiritual growth, because that internal growth means nothing if I'm not going to speak out on issues in our society today. So that's what my video is about today. I want to share with you 3 things that I've been thinking about and really been trying to process over the last few weeks. And I've got a couple of things that I want to get your feedback on. So if you have any thoughts on this, you can certainly drop me a comment on this video, or I'll be sharing this to my Facebook page as well, so you can comment on that. Because with not only do we have these racial protests going on and all of that stuff going on, but this is in the backdrop of this major pandemic, the coronavirus. And now that things had started to open up again in June, now we're seeing that second wave come in. So it's been a while since I've been able to just like sit around a table with a group of people and have a real and honest conversation. And so this making a video and posting it out on social media is just one of the ways that I felt like I could have a conversation, even though it's mainly a one-sided conversation. But if you guys comment, then it is kind of like a conversation. So I encourage you to do that. So three things that I've been thinking about over the past few weeks that I wanted to get out there and share with you guys. And so the first one is my starting with my upbringing. My grandparents, I don't really fault my grandparents for being racist. It was the time that they were raised and the generation that they were raised in. They just had these automatic ingrained racism built in, kind of. And that was kind of the culture that they were raised in. And throughout my childhood, though, I always kind of had this sense that, like, I didn't think that what I was being taught or what they were kind of ingraining in, what the way they spoke about people of color, the way they spoke about Black people, I always sort of felt like that was not right. And so, I've always tried to, because I had these thoughts ingrained in me from an early time, from my early childhood, I've always made an effort to, like, not be racist, right? Because, and I even sometimes check myself if I think something, then I go, oh wait, is that racist? And then, and I feel like maybe a lot of white people do that. Like, we like really try to not be racist, and we really just try to, like, this whole idea of, like, I don't see color, um, just trying to, like, act like we're not racist. And if anybody out there says I'm not racist, then you're either a liar or you're lying to yourself, because I know. And okay, well, maybe that's a little bit of a judgy statement, but I mean, the honest truth is that the way I was brought up with my grandparents, and I don't remember my parents ever really being, like, overtly racist. And so I wouldn't really put my parents into the category of being, like, racist people. So, mom, dad, if you're watching this, I hope you don't think that I think that you're racist, because I don't. But again, it's the culture, it's the background, it's the history that this is sort of ingrained into our culture somewhat. So I've always made an effort to, like, not be racist, because I know that those thoughts are already there and that those feelings are there. But what I've been hearing over the last few weeks, and what I've realized, is that at this point in time, like, not being racist isn't good enough. It's not enough to be, like, not racist or try to make an effort to be not racist. That it's really time for people to come out and be anti-racist. And that's difficult. There's a lot of things, like when you hear those sort of, like, off-color jokes, or you hear somebody make like name calling, or just sort of making a sort of vaguely racial slur. Those things that just sort of, like, they just sort of flow over. And it's really hard to speak out against those things. And it's really hard to know, as, like, a middle class white person, it's really my responsibility to educate myself and to see where those prejudices are and where those racist thoughts are coming from, and to try to educate myself in ways to not only be not racist, but to be anti-racist, and to say that's not okay. That is not acceptable speech. It's not acceptable behavior, and to really speak out against these things that I'm seeing and hearing. And that's difficult, that's challenging, but it's time. I really think that this is the time. The tide is changing. I really hope that the tide is changing, that we go from being, like, not racist to being anti-racist. And those are different things. Like, just being not racist is more of an internal thing, that, like, I just try to be not racist. But being anti-racist is outward, that I'm trying to speak out and point out those times among my friends and family when I hear and see things that are racist, to really challenge the status quo, to challenge the way things are, and to get out there and be an active part of this movement, and to be an active part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and to see that, yeah, that even though I'm not racist, or I try not to be racist, I try not to, like, outwardly be racist, that there is a lot of systemic racism in our culture that's sort of built in. And so to identify those things, and it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable as white people to talk about it, and to see it, and to recognize it, and to be okay with those things changing. That is really difficult. It's really uncomfortable, but it's time for us to see those things and to start changing those things. Okay, number 2. The other thing that I've been really struggling with, and I'm just going to be honest, like, this is just me speaking from my heart and being honest. one of the most difficult things that I've come across in my effort to be not racist and in my effort to be anti-racist is people who respond to these things with what I'm going to call soundbite politics. Soundbite politics. So we all have our favorite media outlets, right? And I'm not even going to call it news, but the cable news networks that people are watching that are clearly biased, they teach us these soundbite politics. And I would even call them straw man arguments. And the reason why I call them straw man arguments is, number one, a lot of these catchphrase or soundbite politics, first of all, they're true. They're like factually true. So it's really difficult to refute something that's factually true, but it's off point. The second part of the straw man argument is that it's like deflecting somewhat off of the main point to something that's sort of off topic, just off topic enough that it's like, you're having a conversation with somebody and then they come back at you with this like little sound bite, and you're like, that's true. It's also off topic. And the third thing that these soundbite politics do is they reduce this like huge, giant political issue, social issue. It reduces this really a larger conversation into a little soundbite, into this one little 2 or 3 word phrase. And I'm going to give you an example. One that we all know, one that we've all heard, one that many of us maybe have said, is the in response to this Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of people are saying, well, all lives matter. It's true, factually true. All lives do matter. It's, however, a little bit off topic. The reason why Black people have to say Black Lives Matter is because for so long they have felt, I think, again, as a white person, I'm interposing my opinion onto other people, but that the systemic racism, the things that we're seeing, that they actually have to say out loud that their lives matter. So to respond to that with something that's it's true, it's kind of missing the target a little bit. It's kind of missing the point. And it's this little tiny like soundbite political statement, this little tiny, like little tiny, teeny tiny little soundbite that's trying to encapsulate this whole, you're trying to deflect having a conversation by using this little catchphrase, is what I feel. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm seeing. And I've seen a lot of it. There are a lot of other examples, but this video is going to run really long if I try to go into all of them. That's the soundbite. That's the straw man argument, is that yes, it's true. It's kind of off point, and it's also reducing a really complex conversation into one little tiny soundbite or catchphrase. These things are almost like catchphrases. People just say them without even really thinking about it. You're trying to have a conversation with somebody and they just respond. They have like this canned, that is so infuriating to me when you're trying to have like a real and honest dialogue and conversation with somebody, and all they really have to say is this like little canned response. And so where your comments will come in is in response to that. How do you respond to somebody who's trying to you're trying to have a conversation and they keep coming back with these like little soundbite canned responses? Is it better to have like a prepared canned response to those little soundbite politics? Do you ignore them entirely? Do you try to address them? I think an experiment that I'm going to try is when somebody has one of those little tiny catchphrase soundbite responses, is to say, tell me more about that. Tell me why you said that, why you think that. Just, what's your thought process behind that? And I'm wondering if there is some deeper thought process behind those little sound bites, or are you just repeating something that you've heard on your favorite media outlet, for example? What's really behind that statement? And I really want to open up the lines of dialogue between people And so I'm thinking that the best way to respond to soundbite politics is to say, tell me more about that. Tell me what your thought is about that or how you feel about that. Explain what you mean by that. And I think that's going to be a really good indicator as to whether that person has really thought through what they're saying or if they're just repeating a soundbite. So that's my test. And forewarning to those of you that are my friends and family, if you come at me with soundbite politics, I'm probably going to come back at you with that question. Tell me more. Tell me why you're saying that. Tell me what your thoughts are about that. And then I'll really know. And then I'll know if you've thought about it or if you're just repeating something that you've heard and you have this catchphrase that you can just say and that seemingly refutes the conversation that we're having. And it's really deflective. I think a lot of people are saying things, these soundbite politics, to deflect or to get out of a conversation. They can just end a conversation with like a little 2 or 3 word phrase, and that's kind of like, whoop, we're it. That's it. That's my response. We're done talking about it now. So I'm really going to start challenging that. And if you've got a better suggestion, or if there's a way that you have been able to open up dialogue with people who are responding with soundbite politics, put your comments, because I'd like to know how you're responding to that and what a good way is to open that dialogue back up again, because that's what my objective would be, not necessarily to have an argument to defute somebody's standpoint, but to really hear what they have to say. And I'm not hearing what people have to say when they're just repeating something that they've heard on social media, that this little soundbite. So enough about the soundbite. Calm down. Okay, we're going to calm down. That's one of the things that's really infuriating to me, is when people just have these little like canned, phrases that they can just pop off at a moment's notice, and they really are trying to I think maybe people are trying to get out of having a real and honest conversation by using soundbite politics. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Okay, we're moving on, guys. We're moving on. The third thing, number 3, the third thing that I've heard in some of these conversations that I was seeing on social media and on TV and people talking about this, is this phrase, original sin. And I have a lot of friends, and I have a lot of family, more friends than family, that are theology nerds. So if you want to comment your thoughts about original sin and explain to us all what original sin is theologically, you can drop that in the comments line. But original sin, as I understand it, we started out with, in the Bible, Adam and Eve, and they were given pretty much like one little simple commandment: don't eat of the tree of knowledge. That's exactly what they did. And they had the knowledge of their sins. And, then we have like second generation human beings is like Cain and Abel. And so like right off the bat, at the beginning of humanity, there's a murder. So humanity just starts off with violence. And so we have this idea of original sin, that since the beginning of humanity, we've had this sin as a part of our lives, and it's passed on generationally, generation to generation. Sins like violence, murder, greed, war. There are other things that might be considered to be original sin. And I go to a mainline Protestant denomination. I go to a Presbyterian church. So part of our liturgy, a part of our worship service on every Sunday, is a prayer of confession. And usually like a corporate prayer of confession has a lot of things to do with those sort of corporate sins. So like, I'll give you a couple of examples. So like, I myself personally have never committed a murder. And yet I am a part of a society that's a very violent society, and murder happens all the time in our society, in our culture. It's a major issue. And so corporately, as a part of the culture, even though I personally have never committed murder, I still confess for that original sin because it's part of our culture. Similarly, I don't consider myself to be a particularly greedy person, but this one may be a little more pertinent to most people. I don't consider myself to be a greedy person, but I participate in a culture that promotes greed. And I participate in that in ways like, maybe I shop at stores that put profits over people. Maybe those stores don't pay their employees very well, or maybe those employers don't provide any kind of benefits like health insurance benefits, or maybe they don't take care of their employees very well. So in that way, I am participating in greed. And so that's part of our corporate. A lot of times in our worship service, this corporate prayer of confession will often contain something about greed. I'm not a soldier. I've never actively participated in a war, but my tax dollars, and as a part of the culture, I have participated in war. And certainly we can have a conversation at another time about justified war and when war is justified or not. But in some ways, I have participated in that because I'm part of this culture that participates in that. And so we talk about this original sin are these things that are sort of built into the human condition, violence and war and greed and oppression. Those are all things that are sort of part of this human condition that we're all born with. It's kind of passed along culturally. And so a lot of what I've been hearing lately is that racism is part of that original sin, particularly for Americans, because racism is sort of a descendant of the slavery. And so slavery in America, even though slaves were freed, that we continue to this, through various laws and systems, we've continued to oppress Black people, people of color, and that racism is part of our culture. And so in that way, again, even if I've tried to be not racist in my life, I'm still part of that original sin culturally. And I've heard some people, I've seen some posts on social media where it's like, we're asking our children to ask for forgiveness for the sins of our fathers. And I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that we're not asking your children to go up to Black people and ask for forgiveness for slavery. That's not the issue. The issue here is confessing our sins to God, that we are a part of this culture, of this system, and that this has been passed down to us culturally from previous generations. Even if my ancestors, did or maybe didn't hold slaves, maybe my ancestors didn't even live in America at the time of slavery. And I don't know a ton about my ancestry, but I think my ancestors came over to the United States much later in the late 19th century, the early 20th century. So I don't, my people weren't even here during the time of slavery, but yet those systems that were put in place and those attitudes and those thoughts have been passed down generationally. And I know that's true because I can remember, sitting around the kitchen table, and I can remember my grandparents sometimes would say something that to me, even as a child, was like, ooh, that's, ooh, and I don't want to give any examples specifically because I'm not bad-mouthing my own family by any means. And I love my grandparents, and they're wonderful people. And my parents are wonderful people, but I'm using that as an example to say that this is part of our cultural history that's been sort of passed down generationally, that these ideas, these thoughts, and even systems and laws, for example, like Jim Crow laws and things like that, that have been part of our culture as a people, that we do need to seek forgiveness for that. I don't necessarily think that any white person needs to go up to any Black person and be like, please forgive me for the sin of slavery. But more like we need to confess that to God, and that we need to seek forgiveness just in the same way that we do a prayer of confession for corporate sins. In most mainline denominational churches probably do this, that this is a corporate sin that we're all participating in, and we do have to seek forgiveness for that. Because it is part of our corporate, part of our cultural sin, that we are all participating in some way. And so to recognize that and to have that a part of our spiritual growth, I think that's important, is that we recognize the systems that we're part of, and to work to rectify those injustices, but that we also are confessing our sins to God, and we're asking for forgiveness for those sins. So those are the big things that I've been thinking about lately. And if you have a comment on any of the above subjects, feel free to hit that comment box. This video is running a little long, so I'm going to go ahead and conclude. I have found this prayer of confession that I wanted to say, and I want to conclude with a prayer of confession because that's kind of where I ended my little speech that I've given you all. And I found this on a website from the Western Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church Anti-Racism Worship Resources. So this is kind of long, bear with me. I'm going to get through this prayer of confession and then call it the end to this video. Here we go. O God, who created and loves all people, we come before you today confessing the sin of racism in our country, our church, and ourselves. Forgive us for our part in it, for the ways we have contributed to the oppression of others, whether knowingly or unknowingly. We want to be different, and for our nation to be different, but it is hard when we face injustice of institutions as well as the prejudice of ourselves. Help us to see the reality of racism and bigotry wherever it exists, and to have the courage to challenge it. Through your Holy Spirit, may we be given the grace and power to change within ourselves, and also to join with others to do the work of love and justice in the world, to move forward the goal of bringing an end to racism. Through the name of your Son, Jesus, who came for all people. Amen.